Hey, FlimsyLunchTray here, and welcome to our Saturday upgrading commander build video today, as we're going to be looking at the Tier 5 British battleship, the HMS Agincourt. Pretty sure I'm pronouncing that right, but who knows these days anymore. So we're going to be looking at the armor scheme, the commander, the upgrades, modules, consumables, this, that, and the other, and I'll give you my thoughts on two possible, I think, mainline builds you can do with the Agincourt, but I'll show you what I have, of course, as well. So first off, what type of battleship is the HMS Agincourt? Well, she's not a sniper battleship. I mean, this is Tier 5. I mean, she has a 15.3 kilometer range. I mean, there's other battleships that have better range. I can reach 16, 17, and 18. You don't get a spotter plane here on the Agincourt as well. So she's not a long-range battleship, and her, even though she has 14 guns, she has 7 turrets, they're not so accurate. It's kind of like the Fuso Tier 5 experience. You throw enough crap at the wall, some of it is bound to stick, hopefully. But she's much more of a mid-range battleship. And that she can brawl, but as we highlighted in Friday's video yesterday, which I'll tag at the end, Friday highlight of the build I'm showing you today, and some other builds, brawl wisely, just because of her armor scheme and stuff, and we'll get into that. And when you're brawling at Tier 5, it's a completely different experience than brawling at Tier 8, as to a certain extent. So she can do the mid-range, and for Tier 5, I'm going to say mid-range is like 10 kilometers. Usually I say mid-range, like higher tier, it's like 12 kilometers and up, but I think mid-range, it's probably, you can argue 9 to 10 kilometers is mid-range at the lower tiers, because everything just like happens closer and it happens much more slowly. So if you play around that, I don't have a full concealed build, but we can talk about that as well. But yeah, so some interesting things going on here with the HMS Agincourt, but mainly due to her secondaries. She's got these 76mm guns. They pin 13mm, reload time 2.4 seconds. And then we also have these larger 152mm guns, and this makes her out to be that brawler, especially when you build her for range, which can get up to 8.3 kilometers. But not highlighted right now just because of I don't have a combat signal that increases the range. But regardless, let's talk about the armor. So I was kind of like, you know, she's a battleship, but she kind of reminds you of a battle cruiser kind of thing. And just kind of with her armor scheme, you have 19mm fore-end and aft-end plating. So it's definitely not durable per se, and hopefully you don't see Tier 7s, otherwise you'll be hurting. That's probably, this Agincourt is not up tier well. That's, I guess, another weakness to point out there. But your deck plating in the midsection of the ship is 38mm, so it helps you a little bit be a little more resilient to the HE spam. You know, if you got some destroyers and stuff shooting at you. Your superstructure isn't massive. You just got these the forward and rear superstructure, 13mm armor. And as we begin to come down on our casemate armor, it's 152mm, which drops to a 229. Coming forward, 152, and then 102. So of course your strongest part in the ship is in the midsection, and you want to be able to try to angle when possible. Maybe you can bait out an enemy battleship shooting you there. Your citadel, which is hidden right down in here. You have some torpedo bulkheads. You can actually see beneath where the turrets are, you have 38mm, almost over here. Otherwise you have 25mm. Behind that, I'm not sure, but we see we have 76 here in the front and 76 in the back. Kind of hard to get a forward or a rear sit in on this, but it is possible to sit, but you have to be able to punch enough at the right angle. Up close, you're going to probably just go right through the main deck and not get into this citadel. So more kind of a lobbing shell at range per se. Especially when we put this up, you can see this little bit of this kind of like turtleback ideology, I guess, going on here, and helping further protect the citadel. So I've not been citadel very often in this thing, but when I do, I think it tends to happen more at range, if I recall correctly. But we're going to go into start talking about first our modules. So HMS Agincourt, unless you take a captain perk skill when you're within secondary range of another enemy ship, your reload time is just 36 seconds, but you have 14 guns. So she's a bit of a devastator to cruisers with her armor piercing. Otherwise, you're pretty much relying more on your high explosive with destroyers and battleships, unless you catch a battleship broadside at decent range. And these shells have a decent fire chance, which we'll talk about with the armament. About 180-degree turn time of 37.5 seconds. Now we could drop that down more. We have greasy gears on our commander, but we don't have it here on the third slot since this is a secondary build I'm going to show you, but I'll talk about a main battery build as well. Maximum HE shell damage 4,400, maximum AP shell damage 8,100. So these, again, these are 305s. So these, you have a very heavy broadside at tier 5 for a tier 5 battleship. This mainly due to her sheer amount of guns. I think she does. I could be wrong. If she has the heaviest broadside at tier 5, probably close to Oklahoma, or Oklahoma's a little under, but it is massive here with HMS Agincourt. Your hit points 48,400, armor 13 to 305 millimeter, main turrets 7, secondary guns 30, and that's actually something I didn't hit on. I was talking about the turret armor. That's going to come up here in a minute, but 305 on the front, 203 on the side, and 254 on the back. 76 on top. So your weakest on the top, you can see there's actually a little 38 millimeter here around the edge on where it's like upward facing. So your frontal plate armor is the strongest here on the ship, as you see here with the hull. And you may notice that there's no mention of AA, and that's because you have no anti-aircraft defense here on HMS Agincourt. So if you get focused down by a CV, well, you're just up a creek. Gunfire control system, 15.3 kilometer range. That is all you're going to get out of HMS Agincourt. And trust me, you wouldn't want to really be playing the ship anyhow at 17, 18 kilometers just because of how inaccurate the guns are in terms of their sigma and horizontal and vertical dispersion, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Your speed is 22 knots. For the sake of it, I tend to like to throw the CRMI combat signal on my tier 5 battleships just so I get a little more speed. So it bumps us up to 23.1 knots here. Going in on the upgrades, so I'll talk about a main battery build and I'll talk about the secondary battery build that I have done right now. So for a secondary battery build, I would encourage going for the auxiliary armaments modification 1. This is going to improve your secondary battery survivability plus 100%. That is the reason you take this, because again, you have no AA mount, so that doesn't take into account here. But because we've gone all out for the secondary build on HMS Agincourt, we've gone for secondaries, okay? I wouldn't, if you're going for a main battery build, I wouldn't really bother with main armaments modification 1. I mean, you have 7 turrets and 14 guns, so what if one turret goes out? You still have 12 guns, right? As you wait for it to come back on. What I would actually suggest if you're going for a main battery gun build, meaning you're not going to be playing more than a secondary range, is consider going for the damage control party mod 1. Now you could still make an argument perhaps with this in the brawling build, but this is going to increase your consumable action time of your damage control party by plus 40%. Right now with the build we have, I have it up to 16.5 seconds, and I did the math on my calculator, but I will just on my PC. But I think this gets you up to over 23 seconds. I'll just check that math real quick. Yeah, 23.1 seconds. So that's actually pretty decent. So as I said, she doesn't take a lot of focus fire very well. So just having a longer lasting damage control party, I would definitely go for this if I was doing a main battery build here on HMS Agincourt. For third slot, or second slot, excuse me, the real winner is just the damage control system mod 1. This is just going to help your survivability and reducing your risk of catching fire by -5%, risk of flooding -3%. For the third slot, again, we're going for the secondary build. So we've taken the secondary battery modification 1, range plus 20%, maximum secondary battery shell dispersion, -20%, without any commander builds taking into effect there. So that is definitely what you want to go for a secondary build. If you're going for a main battery build, then of course you could look at the main battery mod 2. This is going to improve your turret traverse time by plus 15%. So we said that was 37.5. That would get you down to 31.8 second, 180 degree turn time. But probably what I would actually lean towards, if I were you, for a main battery gun build, I would go for Aiming Systems Mod 1. And this is going to reduce your maximum main battery shell dispersion vertically and horizontally by -7%. So on the right side of the screen here, I'll put what it looks with and without, with being on top, so you can see what the best looks like. And you still get a slight secondary bump, but I mean, it's the main battery. We were just trying to get those 14 guns just performing a little bit more accurately. So this would be my main recommendation for a main battery build. This one if you're doing a secondary battery build. In terms of our armament, you have high explosive shells. They have a reload time of 36 seconds, as we discussed, 4,400 maximum damage. 31% chances of causing fire on a target. So if you're going for a main battery build, I would actually throw on Victor Lima and India X-Ray, which is going to bump us up to 33% chances of causing fire on a target. And when I was looking on the ship builder yesterday during the Friday highlight video, the chances of getting a fire from a whole salvo fired was like ridiculously high. I think it's like, if I looked at it right, I think it was over 90%. So you're almost kind of guaranteed a fire. But this depends, of course, how many shells are going to land on the target. So they pin 76mm initial velocity, 831 meters a second. With the armor piercing, your maximum damage is 8,100. So you have among the heaviest, if not the heaviest, broadside at tier 5 for a battleship. They have the same initial velocity of 831 meters a second as with the high explosive shells. Sometimes these two are different, but that's not the case here. So if you catch a battleship broadside, especially cruisers, a lot of cruiser players at tier 5, 4, and 6 will often be showing way too much broadside, and they'll do it regularly as they push in, pull out, push in, pull out. So this is a broadside slapper for sure. So that's kind of like my tempting of wanting to do. If I was going to do a secondary battery build, I would do the main battery build, because that's really the only two options you have to work with here, per se, with HMS Agincourt. Those are her two calling cards, if you will. So it's definitely a temptation for that, but I'm a brawler battleship player here in World Warships. You do have the depth charge airstrike. It has a maximum range of 8 kilometers. Reload time 20 seconds. You only get one available flight, though, so you use wisely. Bombs and payload 1, and that maximum bomb damage is 2,900. Consumable wise, damage control party is 16.5 seconds with the commander build we have on. Otherwise, you can get up to over 23 seconds with the special upgrade of the damage control party mod 1. Something I didn't mention with that, if you decide to buy this in the armory, outright it's going to cost you 17,000 coal. Otherwise, if you use a coupon, if the armory does decide to load for me, it was going to cost you, I think it's like 12,500 if I'm not mistaken, as you get a 25% off coupon. But the UI does not like me today. Yeah, I've already used that coupon. Yeah, 25% off. So you can get it cheaper. But if you're a brand new player to World of Warships, I'm probably gonna be like, maybe hang on to your coal and go for some coal ships instead. But it's there. And if you really like Agincourt and you would do a main battery gun build, then definitely pick that special upgrade up. Cooldown time 80 seconds. We can drop that down with November Foxtrot to 76 seconds. Not that I run that regularly here on HMS Agincourt, but it is something to consider taking. You have a repair party, HP per second plus 242. We can bump that up with India Delta to 290. So I'd always run India Delta on any battleships that have a heal, a repair party. The consumable action time standard would be 28 seconds with our build. We have it up to 30.8 seconds with our commander. Cooldown time 80 seconds. Again, we can drop that down to 76 seconds. And with our build, we don't have just 4 heals, we have 5 heals here on the Agincourt. Otherwise, other combat signals I'm going to be running here on HMS Agincourt. Probably, if I'm doing a main battery gun build, this is what I would recommend. If I'm doing a secondary build, then I'd probably recommend this, just so you get your heal and your damage control party back on cooldown a little bit quicker, just because you're within brawling range, right? And now our brawling range is 8.3 kilometers. So you kind of want your DCP and your heal back a little bit quicker than if we were playing a little bit further back at range. So going to the commander, what I'll do is I might switch out the commander just to show you if I was just doing a main battery gun build versus the secondary build, because then I can actually, like, for example, click Concealment Expert, even though I could tell you what that would drop down to, take 1.9 kilometers off. Yeah, anyhow, so secondary build, first you're going to want to go for preventive maintenance, risk of modules becoming incapacitated, negative 30%, secondary battery survivability, plus 15%. So again, we're building into our secondary battery survivability. This is something our Wargaming recently added on in the commander. Another commander slight rework that they had, and also being able to buff up the AA and secondary battery survivability. But again, you have no AA on Agincourt, so it's just going to be the secondary battery you're building into in that regard. And even if you were going for a main battery build, you're not really messing with gun feeder because of how long a reload time. You know, you shoot whatever you have in the turrets, basically. So grease the gears, main battery traverse speed plus 20%. So now that's what you're seeing reflected in that 37.5 seconds. Otherwise, we'd be over 40 seconds, which is pretty terrible. So even if on a brawling build, you really want your grease the gears, especially if you get in close combat, close quarters with another battleship. You know, you want to have a more favorable turret traverse than them if you can. If you're going for a 6-point build, there's two ways you can go first, depending on how many points your commander has starting off. You could go for adrenaline rush. That would be reducing your reload time on your main battery reload time for each 1% of HP lost. And then your secondary battery reload time is also going to drop. But if you want the secondary build right off the bat with like a 10-point build, then I would say go for long-range secondary battery shells first, plus 20%. And for 10-point, go for the manual secondary battery aiming, which is going to give you the permanent effect of negative 10% secondary battery reload time and negative 10% on your maximum secondary battery shell dispersion. And then, as the longer you're engaged with the enemy ship, a time to reach maximum efficiency of 45 seconds for an additional negative 50% accuracy, which really helps in dealing with the enemy destroyers. At the lower tiers, like I think we got 2 close quarters on 2 destroyers in the Friday highlight I had yesterday. We weren't paying attention to the Gata when he died, but our secondaries took him out. So having that additional accuracy in dealing with destroyer players who play a little too carelessly within your secondary battery range is really nice, because I think we killed them like 8.2 kilometer away when, you know, our range is 8.3 kilometer. And then there's a few options you can do here. This depends on which way you want to go first. If you want to, I would probably say go ahead and pick up fire prevention as a 14-point build. This reduces the risk of catching fire by negative 10% and maximum number of fires, negative 1. If you're a new player, let me just kind of highlight that for you real quick. And that being, without fire prevention, you'd have 4 fires set on your ship: the bow, the stern, and the superstructure, forward and rear part of the superstructure. Fire prevention eliminates there being 2 fires in your superstructure, and it's just 1 fire burns there instead. So that means you're ticking for less damage. You're not overworking your repair party or damage control party as much. So you really, that's pretty much like a required skill across all. For most, not all, but most battleships in the game really need fire prevention expert. Then if you wanted to, for a 17-point build, you can go and pick up the adrenaline rush. As I talked about what it did just briefly ago. And then 21-point build, emergency repair expert. And this is giving us a plus 10% on our damage control party action time. So that took us from 15 seconds to 16.5. We have an unlimited number of damage control parties. Our repair party consumable action time went from 28 seconds to 30.8 seconds. And number of repair party consumable charges went to plus 1. So this is what I would recommend for a secondary build. Here on HMS Agincourt. If you wanted to do a, can I just hover over this? I want to recall the commander back on here. If you wanted to do a main battery build with your commander on HMS Agincourt, Would I just use Jack Dunkirk? Almost. I don't know if I'd really still mess with that. I'll just kind of build a new one up. We can just throw the original commander back on. But I'll just kind of hop through this. I won't drag it out. I would do this. So basically, the three changes you see here is we have the emergency repair specialist, which is going to reduce our cooldown time on our damage control party and repair party further. So I'll actually go ahead and master this one, and I'll show you with the November Foxtrot, if you were doing a main battery build, then you can see cooldown time then becomes 73.7 seconds, and cooldown time for the repair party 73.7 seconds. So that's even nicer there. We'd still want the turret traverse, right? See 45 seconds without, 37.5 with. We want the adrenaline rush, we want fire prevention, we want the emergency repair expert, and then your concealment gets down even lower to 10.7. Yeah, I think it's 1.09 was what it would be taken off here. So that's really good, and that makes the ship much more comfortable to play. So when I said, you know, earlier, the mid-range at tier 5 is probably around, let's say, 10 kilometers, as an example. This gives you the ability to play around with being detected or not being detected if you want to step out and needed a heal or whatever and get back into the battle. Kind of like what happened in yesterday's game, but the enemy team just came to us from around an island as we blapped them continuously as they came around. And then the basics of survivability. Module restoration time, -15%, and you're putting your fires and floods out, reduced or improved time, -15%. They're just being put out faster. And that's really ideal to be running here on HMS Agincourt. Now, there might be another little thing we might say here, that if you wanted to take it for fun, I don't know how much mileage you're going to get out of it at tier 5. You could talk about brisk. We were talking about how we were 23.1 knots, but if you're undetected, let's see, that's going to, oops, go back, 1.10, that'll get up to 25.41, 25.4 knots basically. And the reason why I think brisk can be a bit more useful here on HMS Agincourt is because of that really long reload time of 36 seconds. So you'd have like 16 seconds of running around not being detected if there's no enemy ship within your concealment range of 10.7 kilometers. So that I would see being very helpful here. And then if you're doing the main battery build, I would probably say, like, go for demolition expert. Increase your chances of starting a fire if you really want like a fully devoted build here for the fire chance with the main battery, because then now should be a 34% chance, yeah, starting fires between our combat signals and demolition here. Otherwise, you know, gun feeder, I mean, it's never a bad decision, right? Let's say you have another battleship in the game right now where you have this type of build on it, like maybe you have Incomparable, the tier 10 battleship, British battleship with, like, was it 6 510mm guns? Maybe this is the build you run. Then I'd be like, yeah, totally run it on HMS Agincourt as well if you're taking advantage of brisk, since that battleship has insanely good concealment for being a tier 10 battleship here in World Warships. One of the ships that has, I think the best, if I'm not mistaken. It's at least in the top 2, if not top 3. So, but with that being said, I think that's going to bring this video to a close and kind of just showcasing to you the brawling build if you want to brawl in Agincourt tier 5, or if you want to go for more of a main battery build with Agincourt. You could play the ship either way. I think relatively comfortable, because, you know, she's got a lot going for her in her own way, in her own special way. So if you liked today's video, give a thumbs up. If you didn't, give a thumbs down. Subscribe if you do want to see more. If you're subscribed, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thank you to my Patreon supporters as always, and let me know what you like running on your Agincourt if you have one, in terms of the build, in the comments below. So until next time, take care.